And one of the most exciting and controversial topics is self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles. It's also attracted a ton of capital. Here to fill us in on all of that, please welcome Tim Kentley-Clay and Kyle Voigt with Fortune's Aaron Griffith. Woo.
Hi, everyone. That was fantastic. All right, so as Adam said, there has been a massive influx of money pouring into the sector of self-driving cars from automakers, from investors, from big tech companies. I have the CEOs of two companies that are up-and-coming startups. They've been working on this for long before all of these other startups sort of flooded the market. They're both worth $1 billion. Kyle Voigt, CEO of Cruz Automation, building inside the largest automaker in the country, GM, and Tim Kentley-Clay, CEO and founder of Zeus, a stealth mode startup that is trying to build a car from the ground up. So I want to let's start with big picture here. Kyle, why don't you explain the latest with Cruz? What is the end product that you're working on, and when can you make it happen?
Sure. So if I want to back up one step just to talk about why we should care about self-driving cars in the first place, right? Well, I think we have this epidemic on our hands right now, which is that car accidents kill 30,000 plus people every year in the U.S., injure 1 million. And we're not doing much about it right now. It's really hard to make cars safer than they already are. And so, if you have a kid or a teenager growing up right now, you may not have even known that car accidents are the #1 cause of death for teenagers. The stupid thing about it is 90% of those accidents they're caused by humans, not the cars themselves, right? We're texting and driving and doing other crazy things. And so for us, it's all about like this race against the clock to see what we can do about that, to try to take the chaos off the road. So let me answer your question now about Cruz.
Fantastic.
So Cruz is fully owned by General Motors. We're based in San Francisco. We now have a fleet of 38 cars driving around San Francisco, Phoenix Metro, and Detroit. Starting in the next 2 weeks, we're phasing out 100 more self-driving cars in Phoenix and San Francisco, bringing us to 138 total driving every day, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. And starting next week, for the first time, we're launching what we call Cruise to Anywhere, which is an app that's going to be available to our employees that lets them push a button and request a ride from a self-driving car. It will come pick them up from wherever they are in San Francisco.
It will have a human in it, though, correct?
What's that?
It'll have a human in it,
have a person in the car,
yes.
yeah,
All right,
now.
but it will drive itself to pick them up.
Yeah, so people get early exposure to this
And so
technology.
this is your end goal, correct? You want robo-taxis on demand, show up at your house. When can that be? When can that be real?
Well, I think the starting point for this self-driving technology is a rideshare business. And the reason for that is that these are already up and running. People know how to use them. And the initial vehicles are going to be a little more expensive than the average car. And so a fleet model is a good way to make the economics work. But yeah, that's the dream for us, is to have this so very soon. And at this point, it's looking like months, not years, that we're going to have the first production commercial deployments of driverless cars.
And how can that be a reality for me?
Well, if you're in one of the major metros where we're going to be testing these things, you might have an opportunity to try one of these soon. And then when they're deployed commercially, in the same way you would use a ride-sharing app today, you may be able to access one of these vehicles.
But you've got some regulations in your way before that can actually happen, right?
That's right. In the car. Yeah, it's an ongoing debate, and we're working with government officials, both through Cruise and GM, to try to figure out what the right way is to regulate these vehicles and how to ensure that they're safe.
All right, we're going to talk a lot more about all of that, but let's go to you, Tim. A lot of people in the audience probably are not familiar with Zeus. You've been in stealth mode since you were founded, what, like 5 years ago?
About 2.5, actually.
Oh, okay, so only 2.5 years in, already worth $1 billion. And all I know about the company is that you have these crazy drawings that I've seen, which you've said is not what you're actually working on, but it's a crazy looking car that's bi-directional, it has no windshield, it has no steering wheel. How much of that is what you're actually working on? What can you tell us about what you're actually working on?
Yeah, sure. So, Zeus was founded on the insight that AI and mobility is not about incremental adaptation to the automobile. So Zeus is not building a better car. We actually think we're building what comes after the car, which for us is a robot. About 130 years ago, we invented the age of the automobile. The previous mobility age was the horse and carriage. And we're in that age for around 6,000 years. Around 4,000 BC, we domesticated the horse and put the axle on the wheel and got coach building, right? So what let us transition from the age of the horse and carriage to the age of the automobile? Well, arguably it was the invention of the internal combustion engine. We mechanized the horse's biomechanical power. And so the question is, well, what was the right exploitation of that invention? Well, it wasn't to put the engine in the coach and keep the horse, right?
Yeah.
People actually tried it, it didn't work particularly well. It was actually to get rid of the horse and fundamentally change the architecture of the coach to get through to something like in 1908, the Model T Ford, right? And that was the architecture for the automobile. And at Zeus, we believe that AI and mobility means that architecture is now going to be suboptimal for what we need in our cities. What we need is shared, on-demand, zero-emission mobility, a product that when you're not using it, someone else is, a product architecture that is designed for on-demand mobility. The automobile was never designed for that. And so at Zeus, what we're doing is reinventing the entire ecosystem, not just the vehicle itself, and it's not a self-driving car any more than an automobile is a horseless carriage. It's a new architecture, ground up, the ecosystem around it, and we're 270 people now working every day to make that happen.
What does it look like?
You're going to have to wait and see, yeah.
Are you testing these out in the wild?
So we have, in the wild is very much true. So we have test mules in the wild. We have vehicles up in San Francisco as well, testing that are Toyota Highlanders that we've made self-driving, which we're using as surrogates to test our systems. And then on our test track, we have our own prototype vehicles that we're testing and building.
So you're essentially saying that you are building a car from the ground up, starting from scratch.
No, I'm saying we're building what comes after the car.
Okay.
Yeah.
A vehicle of sorts.
Yeah. Well, it's a robot. You see, Silicon Valley was founded on computation, the silicon chip. I think what now is happening, which is really interesting in terms of where we are in terms of evolution, is that chip is having sensors plugged into it so it can perceive the environment. It has machine learning algorithms on it that compute what it's seeing, and that's directly connected to electromechanical actuation. And then that system is given command authority to move through the environment at will. And to me, that's a robot. And so that's what we're creating. We think it's really important because it will help scale our cities into the future.
I mean, I think this is fascinating. You have been described as extraordinary, completely nuts, or maybe a bit of both. What you're doing is super ambitious. How do you plan to pull this off?
Fibonacci. I mean, you start with 2 and 3, you add it together, you get 5. I don't think scale in and of itself should be daunting. It's really how you form the fractal. How do you build things? And so at Zeus, Zeus is really looking at the geometry of mobility on this planet. How do we form it?
What does that mean?
Well, it's a geometric puzzle, how you solve how we move around cities. And my background's in design, but that's often misunderstood what that term means. I always bifurcate it into aesthetics and architectures, right? Most people think design is making things look pretty, but design, I think, correctly understood, is actually asking the question, well, how do we form this thing in the way that we do? Why do we do it in this way? And not just the vehicle, but how do we share it in our communities? What are the resources that went into it? Are they sustainable? How is it going to scale into our cities into the future? In 2050, the United Nations says that 75% of this world's population are going to live in megacity-like environments. And so I think we need on-demand shared mobility to let our cities flourish in the future.
How much more money do you think you're going to need to pull this off? You've raised $250 million now, which is significant.
We raised $40 million in our first year of seed money in 2015. Last year, we raised $250 million, and we'll be raising more again later this year. Yep.
Kyle, talk to me about life inside a big company. You're a 2-time entrepreneur. You've sold 2 previous companies, one for almost $1 billion, Twitch to Amazon. Why sell to GM, and what have you learned as one of the youngest VPs at a very old company?
Okay, so 2 questions. So why we sold to General Motors, I think of it as partnering with General Motors. And it really came down to, we were trying to make that decision. There's 2 paths. There is sort of have the maybe the pride of having your own individual startup and it's you against the world, and just beating against the grain and trying to make that happen. And And then that in this case was at conflict with our true mission, which is to get these self-driving cars on the road as quickly as possible. And when we look at what General Motors brought to table, which is decades of automotive experience, assembly plants, lots of capital, there's no doubt that we could accelerate that mission and compress the timeline by partnering with one of the biggest automakers in the world. And so we had to sort of like, suck up our pride and do what was right, I think, for the mission here. So working inside of a large company has not been, smooth sailing. It took us probably a good 6 months to a year to really figure out how to work well together and to achieve what we have now, which is like mutual respect. We sort of identified that, the folks with decades of experience building cars really know what they're talking about when it comes to assembly plants and how to put things together.
And did they see you as just like the young jerks walking in, telling them how to do their jobs?
I'm sure some people thought that at first. And probably it went way too far in that direction when we first got started. But over time, I think we've developed a mutual understanding and figured out that when it comes to software that's really complex and it needs lots and lots of cycles of iteration to achieve the level of perfection you need to replace a human driver, that we should leverage, Silicon Valley talent and the people at Cruz to do some of that work.
And both of you are competing with Waymo, which was Google's sort of self-driving car spin-out, and they have a lot of resources behind them, and they've been kind of doing this for probably a few more years than you. How can you compete with something like that?
Well, I don't think they have assembly plants yet, so it's going to be hard to build those cars. But no, I think a lot of folks in the space are doing some really great work, and we don't like to belittle or suggest in any way that those guys aren't very formidable competitors, because they are. But I like to think of it, look, the sooner someone brings this technology to existence and fruition, the better. I really want it to be us, and we're going as quickly as possible. And right now, we put some videos on the internet showing our vehicles driving in San Francisco out in the wild, completely unedited footage. And you can see these are actually the most technically advanced demonstrations of self-driving cars that has ever been put out there in public. So we're feeling pretty good about where we are, but we still got a long ways to go.
And I've seen there's been data that shows how many times a driver has to step in. And I think there was a story in the information in February that said that you guys were maybe in third place after Waymo as far as how many times you have to have a driver step in and correct the car. Have you improved since then?
Well, I think disengagement is probably a challenging metric to use, but it's the only publicly available data right now to benchmark different self-driving car companies.
Yeah.
We look at a number of other factors, including what it takes to achieve the level of safety to one day take the driver out of the car. But looking just at disengagements, if you extrapolate based on past data and using our internal metrics, we think we'll actually be in the #1 spot in 3 to 6 months.
And you guys obviously track that sort of data too, and you're doing a lot of simulations. What can you tell us about the data that you're collecting?
I think for us at Zeus, rather than racing to market, we're more interested in getting the thinking right. You said before, how do you compete against capital? I'm not sure capital in and of itself is an enabler for real change. I think it takes vision, passion, a phenomenal team, and an incredible commitment. And I think that's what we have at Zeus. We have 270 people now that are coming in every day to think really deeply around the problem space. And it's more important for us to get those architectures correct so that we're building the right thing.
Now, I want to talk more broadly about all of the partnerships happening in the industry, and I have a slide that hopefully they can pull up that I stole from the San Francisco Chronicle that basically shows all of the big automakers and the investments that they have made in self-driving. And what's interesting is that it feels like everyone's kind of partnering with everybody else. Like, you guys are working with GM. GM has invested in Lyft, and now I see that Lyft has a partnership with Waymo. First of all, so is that awkward? And second of all, how can I make sense of all of these interconnected companies? And then, Tim, maybe I can follow up with you. You guys aren't partnering with anybody. And why is that? So Kyle, go first.
The relationship status it's complicated. There's a lot of people working with a lot of other people. They're all somehow tied together via various investment vehicles and venture arms of various companies. And I think it's going to get a lot more complicated before it becomes more clear what's actually happening. But there's a reason for that. And I think if you look at the first generation of rideshare companies, for example, they're all driven by humans. That's sort of the software for these vehicles that are driving around town. I think the second wave of autonomous or of ride sharing is going to be very different. It's driven by autonomous vehicles, perhaps things like what Tim is working on, and I think that it's an open question which companies will be the ones that make the jump. You know, are you going to be the Amazon or the web van of this transition? And that's to be seen. And so, you know, we're trying to keep our options open. Even at Cruz and GM, we have the equity investment in Lyft. We've been working with those guys, but in the future, it's still to be seen whether, for us, for example, we're sitting on this great technology, whether we partner with everyone, one company, or no companies.
Well, when you saw that announcement, were you like, all right, lock down all the Lyft data, don't let them see all of our secrets because they're going to share it with Waymo?
Yeah, what about that? Yeah, it's, I mean, like I said, it's complicated, and data sharing is going to be really tricky too. I think it's going to take several more months for I think the partnerships to finally settle, because everyone's waiting to see sort of which company or companies pop out that actually have this technology ready for deployment and not just a proof of concept or a flashy demo. There's like a 10,000x difference between a car that can drive around the block without someone touching the wheel and what it takes to drive through urban San Francisco in rush hour.
Well, that's the thing that's crazy to me is there's so much hype out there, and you're purposely avoiding it by saying in stealth mode. We had to beg you to speak at this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like complicated. I like clear, you know. And the reason we're in stealth mode is not because we're particularly secretive. It's just that we have a perspective, and our heads are down perfecting the fundamental art and science of Zeus. I think advanced automation robotics is really different to what we've seen before. You know, traditionally in the automotive framework, you know, you have a tier 1 supplier that might spend 5 years writing some firmware that goes on a rack and pinion steering system that's sold to an OEM and then sold to a customer and monetized once, and the code on that system never changes for the life of its duration in that product. Robotics are advanced learning systems that require recursive frameworks to continuously self-improve. The maps are like their memories. They're intimate to the success of the whole system. Every time we drive the vehicle, we're acquiring data to improve the performance of the system. We have a large team of brilliant software engineers working every day on that. And so I think the model needs to fundamentally change, that you're not monetizing once for a price point, because how do you support that team of people to continuously improve that system? You need to go to an on-demand model where you're paying per mile and creating those systems. And so at Zeus, you know, I think we're actually unique in the entire landscape, ironically, as a startup. So against companies that have been acquired, working with automakers, tech giants, they're all trying to partner. It sounds like you spend months with lawyers talking about how to do that. I think that's suboptimal. and so at Zeus, we believe strongly that under one roof, under one product architecture, creating an ecosystem, not a self-driving car, will lead to outperformance in the marketplace. And that's what we're about.
Anything to add to that, Kyle?
I think that works, but like I said, we're optimizing around getting this technology to market as quickly as possible. And so if a partnership strategy means we can get there that much sooner and start taking the chaos off the road this year instead of 2, 3, 5 years from now, that's worth it to me.
I want to go to audience questions, so get ready, but to get you prepared to raise your hands. Can I just see a show of hands? How many people have actually ridden an autonomous car? So that is a lot of people in this room. So I think this audience is probably over-indexing on being pro self-driving cars. But I know that there are a lot of people out there that are very scared of self-driving cars. The first autopilot death happened a year ago, and Tesla responded. Elon Musk said, "Do the bloody math. It was bound to happen." How can you guys get people, the wider audience, not just this audience, but the world, more comfortable with self-driving cars?
Was that a direct quote?
He wrote that to Fortune, actually.
Interesting. Okay. Well, look, I think anything that's new is sort of intimidating and scary at first, and self-driving cars are no different. I think it's going to take, basically there's going to be a normal technology adoption cycle. There are going to be people who are going to be in line, probably many of you in this audience, saying, I want to go first, I want to try this out. But I think the burden is on the people developing the technology and putting this together that demonstrate that this is actually something that you can trust. And so we look at that from a number of angles, maybe like having the cars out there in the real world and collecting empirical evidence of their safety. So there's not this question about whether it's going to be safe. It's been out there in the field on the same roads in the same conditions, wide variety, and it works. And I think that combined with sort of phasing these things in, letting people see them, see how they work, getting behind the wheel, and then eventually is the right path to having this technology be quickly adopted.
Any thoughts on that, Tim?
Get in, buckle up, you're going to love it.
All right.
No, but I mean, I think, there's a certain set of the community that's always going to be afraid. You know, people won't fly today, even though it's, I don't think there's been a death in America from aviation in like 8 years now, right? And there's a lot of planes in the air. So, you're going to have people that are afraid of it. You're also going to have early adopters. I think you can manage the risks. I think the technology is coming. You know, at Zeus, we're building the real thing. We're not building a bent tubular steel prototype vehicle that gets put in a museum quickly. This vehicle will be freeway capable. It'll have airbags. It's passive safety architecture. We think actually can meet and exceed what you can get in an automobile because of the way we've changed the configuration of the vehicle fundamentally. And so the passive safety is actually very, very strong in this vehicle.
Do you have a timeline on when you are hoping to reveal it?
Yeah, so our publicly stated long-range goal is 2020. We want to be ready to deploy the vehicle. So we're basically on a 5-year vehicle development program. Typically an OEM, if they do an iteration on the existing vehicle, it's a 5-year program. So we kicked off in 2015 a 5-year program. My co-founder, Dr. Jason Levinson, and myself, 2 guys, 1 laptop, like really kicked it off, no money. And we're looking to conclude that in 2020.
Fantastic. Let's see if there's any questions from the audience. Where are the yellow paddle people? Right here. She will get you in the front here.
Hi, Rick Chavey with Interworks. If you make a parallel to the computer industry, PCs, do you think of yourself as a closed system, or a closed system for now, but opening up later to let others innovate on your platform? So how do you think about this? Is there any analogy you could make?
Fantastic.
Well, I think open platform is a great idea, and I think that there's possibly a path to that in the future. But if you look at these vehicles have a very high level of safety. We're talking about carrying real passengers here. So it's not like your desktop PC. And so I look at it more like if you look at companies like Boeing and Airbus who are running this mission-critical, safety-critical software, it's not open source. It's not an open platform where you can go plug in your own modules to it. That said, we may get to some point in the future where there are layers on top of the autonomous driving behavior itself where you can do some really interesting things inside of the car, but we're not there yet.
Let's do a question from back over there.
Hi, I'm Mike Dana with Fierce Wireless, and I wanted to see if maybe both of you could just talk about the government regulations in this area, because, I mean, to drive my car, I need to have a license, and I need to have insurance, and I've been pulled over for a busted taillight. I just don't understand what the government regulations are in this area, and whether it's a concern.
Well, I'm not sure anyone understands what the government regulations are at this point in time. What I can say in Zeus's case is actually Mark Rosekind, who was the former administrator of NHTSA, is actually Chief Safety Innovation Officer at Zeus. Last year, under his leadership, that organization put out some guidelines for how to, in a risk-managed way, deploy advanced autonomous systems in the community, which we fully support. And he's now steering those thoughts from Zeus' side of the fence on all levels of government.
And is he pulling his hair out, or is he hopeful that this can happen quickly?
No, Mark's a real leader. He doesn't pull his hair out. He gets the work done. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thoughts on regulation?
I'd agree with that. It's still, there's a lot of work being done.
Would you say it's the biggest thing holding back self-driving cars from becoming a reality?
I mean, some states are saying, our arms are open. Come deploy these cars here right now. Mm-hmm. So there are places where you can do it. But I think what's happening right now is there's discussion of things happening at a federal level, which would be interesting because then you don't have a patchwork of state-by-state legislation or an autonomous vehicle that has to stop and kick you out once it crosses state lines. Mm-hmm. So we're really excited to see some progress made there, but I wouldn't say it's holding back the deployment of at least the first wave of driverless vehicles.
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is safety, right? Like, I think in Michigan and Florida today, you could actually legally put a vehicle on the road with no one in it driving itself. None of the development community are doing that because the technology is not quite ready. And that's what makes this really different and hard. There's plenty of teams that can get to 80, 95, 98% success, but you really need to get to at least 4 nines of success. And so to do that, you really need to ask very serious engineering questions around how you engineer your vehicle and guarantee safety, even while employing advanced machine learning techniques within that system.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Let's go over there.
Kind of springboarding off the last question, what about cyber and turning vehicles with antennas and computers on board into weapons by hacking?
Yeah, it's definitely a big concern, right? Like, we work, again, very carefully with our teams to have really good state-of-the-art cybersecurity on our vehicles. I actually don't think our vehicles are particularly good target for that sort of activity because they're really well controlled, really well understood where they are.
Have you guys been hacked? Any attempted hacking?
Not that we know of. Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is a very difficult topic because, you know, I was once told by someone that anyone who says they're not terrified of cybersecurity, you shouldn't trust. It is something that we are deeply worried about, and I think that fear is a very strong motivator to be proactive and to take steps in the right direction. That said, I mean, I think some of the implications of cybersecurity are slightly overblown. Like there's, you know, the same things that you could do by taking control of a car, you could do by having someone get in that car. So we're focusing on how we can secure the network, how we can keep the car safe and make it so at least the parts where you control the steering wheel and the brake pedal and all the mission critical surfaces are highly protected and secured to the best of our ability.
Fantastic. All right, I think we're probably out of time unless there's maybe one last lingering question out there. Guys, thank you so much. Hopefully one or both of you will become the Amazon of self-driving cars in the future. Thank you guys.